Blumenthal.
This is quite a dangerous abortion for her, and that child is definitely capable of feeling pain as he is dismembered.
With all due respect, I don't think these kinds of hypotheticals really
Yeah,
reflect...
don't tell me that, because this is a tough case. A situation where 34th week, the mother says, I've decided I don't want to have this baby. Turn row. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator. Our ranking member has returned from the vote, and I
Yes.
turn to him.
I apologize to some of our witnesses. I had to leave to go vote. Professor Sneed, I find your area of expertise and research to be very interesting. It seems to me there are two options, and if there are others, I hope you will school me. With respect to abortion, one option is to have a federal rule that applies to every American. Under the current status of the law, in order to have a federal rule, more likely than not, Congress would have to pass it. Or we would have to amend the Constitution, since the United States Supreme Court has ruled that abortion is not addressed in our Constitution. The second option, of course, is to let the American people decide on a state-by-state basis. There are at least two ways that people in a state can decide. One is through their elected representatives, the state legislature. The other is through a public referendum. Are there any other options other than those?
Well, not if the people are the ones doing the deciding. We saw for almost 50 years what happens when a court decides to constitutionalize the question and takes the matter away from the political sphere, in which one has to live with whatever that court decides. You could Roe v. Wade's one model. You could imagine another model in which a court imposes restrictions on abortion by virtue of interpreting whatever the constitution of that state or sovereign country happens to be. But if the people are to decide, it could either occur in the ways that you described, namely through the federal political branches. Now, there's an interesting question about what the scope of Congress's authority is to regulate the practice of medicine in the states. You'd have to find an enumerated power. Maybe it's the commerce power or something like that. But it's not an obvious source of authority in the Constitution to regulate the plenary authority of the states and override their decisions to regulate the practice of medicine. So what we see most often is the states themselves pursuing as what's been described as a patchwork, whatever is consistent with the values of the people of that state, whether it be through their representatives or through by direct referendum.
Let me ask you this, because I'm particularly interested in your analysis of this tough issue from an ethics perspective. Some of my colleagues believe, and indeed in my opening statement I alluded to some legislation that some of my colleagues are supporting. They believe that we should have a federal rule that applies to every American that says it is solely the right of the mother. The mother has the unfettered discretion to decide when, if ever, to undergo an abortion. What ethical considerations does that present?
Well, the principal ethical question that is under consideration in this whole context is how do the various competing goods relate to one another? I've heard a lot of folks talk about the goods of autonomy and freedom and the pursuit of well-being and health care on the one hand. Others.
Let me put it another way. Excuse me
for
interrupting. I was maybe a little abstract. Let's suppose that a mother presents at 34 weeks and says, clearly past the point of viability for the child, and says, I have decided I don't want to have this baby. If I'm being honest, I don't want to have this baby. And it is going to cause me enormous emotional distress to have this child. I'm just not ready. And she's sincere. She's really thought about it and said, I'm just not prepared to have this child, and it will affect me emotionally. And I want an abortion. What are the ethical considerations presented by that situation as opposed to the ethical considerations, if any, presented by an abortion within the first 6 weeks of a pregnancy?
Well, I would say that the principal ethical question when you're talking about what it sounds like you're describing, legally speaking, would be termed an elective abortion, not an abortion necessary to preserve a woman's life or health. And that is principally, incidentally, that is principally what the social science evidence suggests. Late-term abortions are principally for situational, circumstantial reasons, not for instances of health and safety or even fetal abnormality, according to experts like Warren Hearn and other social science studies that have been undertaken. But the principal ethical question in any of these instances is, what is the moral, ontological, and legal status of the unborn child? What you're talking about is the proposal to take the life of an independent human being for the sake of the goods that you are describing, that to preserve emotional well-being, to preserve a woman's mental peace or her socioeconomic peace. That's the ethical question. That's what's so in some ways impoverished about our public debate. We hear one side talking about one aspect of the issue, the goods of autonomy and healthcare and so on, and the other side talking about the ontological, biological, and moral status of the unborn child, but the talking is going past one another. No one is, as far as I can tell, engaging all of the different dimensions of the debate, which I think is essential for wise and humane self-governance. No matter what your position on abortion is, you should at least take seriously the other side's perspective. And that's what's missing, I think, from our public debate. And I'm not talking about my colleagues here on the dais, but our public debate would benefit from a more comprehensive conversation about what the competing goods are.
With my chair's permission, I'm going to see if anyone else wants to weigh on this. Let me present the situation again, because this is a tough case. A situation where 34th week, the mother says, I've decided I don't want to have this baby. And it will affect me emotionally. I just don't want the child. Should the mother, at that juncture, have the right, clearly a viable child, to abort the child? And who should make that decision? And how do you represent the child's interest at that point? Who represents the child's interest at that point? Now, that's a tough question. Would anybody else like to weigh into that, on that? Mr. Matto? My eyes are terrible.
Mr. Matto-Zimmet.
Mr. Matto-Zimmet?
With all due respect, I don't think these kinds of hypotheticals really
Yeah,
reflect.
don't tell me that.
I
mean,
don't think they reflect the
you
reality
just
of
dod-
abortion
you just
care in this
dodging the
country.
question. You're just dodging the question.
I don't think that there's a point.
That's what
Witnesses actually get to answer the question.
that's what your side always says. Now, that's not my example's not unrealistic.
I think that every.
If your answer, I'm going to save my time. If your answer is going to be that never happens, let me go to Ms. Fry. What do you think?
Well, Senator, first of all, if you don't ask a question if you don't want to know the answer. And I think 1%, but I'm saying to you, Senator, 1% of abortions happen at 21 weeks or later. Mm-hmm. So I think the premise of your question sets up a conversation about abortion that is unfair. It is rarely is that ever the instance. The vast majority of pregnancies and abortions that are considered late in a pregnancy have to do with severe, devastating medical circumstances. And I understand your point, Senator. I understand your point. But with all due respect, I also think the chances of people sort of getting all the way through a pregnancy and just sort of saying, I don't want it, is disrespectful to women.
Well,
the majority of women who are getting abortions are already mothers,
if
Senator.
That's the case,
they respect
I don't
their
wanna argue with
kids.
you. I'm really trying to have a discussion. But that is the alternative I presented is very realistic. I'm not saying it happens 1,000 times today, but that's where the rubber meets the road. And the answer I always get is, well, that never happens. Well, you don't know that, and I don't know that.
But I think the
And
difference,
I'm
what I would
saying-
say, Senator,
what I'm
is
saying
making a
let me finish
rule.
my thought. What I'm saying is, if it's not a problem, then why wouldn't we make everybody happy by saying, I'm not recommending this, I'm asking a question. Then why wouldn't we just say, okay, if you say it's not a problem, then what's the problem with saying after a certain number of weeks you can't have an abortion? Let me talk to Dr. Scott. You heard my example, okay?
We're
And-
now well into Senator Blumenthal's time.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry.
wrap up at your time.
Can I get the doctor's answer? I didn't see Dick come in, I'm sorry.
Well, I would just say that we don't keep very close eye on what's going on in the abortion industry in this country. There are at least 5 abortion facilities that have no gestational limits on the abortions that they will do. So they will do an abortion on request. The woman that you described clearly needs mental health counseling. She clearly needs support. It is highly likely she is being coerced into that decision. The data that we have on late abortions,
But what
again,
if she's not? What if she is honestly?
You're really into Senator Blumenthal's time now. You can have the witness answer the question, but then
Okay.
it's not your time any longer.
What if she's not? What if she hadn't been
Just said
coerced?
This is-
it's not
this is
your
quite-
time any longer.
this-
Let her finish, and I'll recognize Senator Blumenthal.
this is quite a dangerous abortion for her, and that child is definitely capable of feeling pain as he is dismembered. So as a moral society, we should absolutely say, no, we're not going to let that opportunity for that late abortion to happen, and we should be willing to set some limits.
Senator Blue.